So you have to learn how to develop people. And if you can, either you're already good at it, have an idea, or you learn that, that results in a much easier ability for somebody to relinquish some of that control, right? Because if you're building people, you can ease off of that control. It's no different than driving a stick. You got to play with the clutch and the gas. It's the clutch and the gas, clutch and the gas. You got to be able to develop people. You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the more you can get yourself into the understanding and ability to develop and grow people, build the trust that is required to do that. It does take a lot of trust. It takes patience. You have to create the right environment. But the more you do that, the more then you can ease off of the control piece.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities.
Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today we are joined by Rob Marcus of Blue Stallion Solutions. He is the founder and CEO based out of Fredericksburg, Virginia, pretty close to where my alma mater in college was, there in Richmond. And today we're going to be talking about that critical moment when you cross over from being an individual contributor to a leader. And what are some things that you need to do so that you can create the successors that will allow you to advance? Because without those successors, there's like this vacuum that's just kind of holding you back and sucking you down. So, and Rob's got some practical experience in terms of his industry career. And then now he is also an expert who helps other leaders make a similar journey. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Lee. It's great to be here.
Rob, tell our listeners a little bit about, what do you do now as a leadership coach and consultant at Blue Stallion Solutions, and then we'll jump back in the time machine to talk about little Rob as he's growing up.
Yeah, sure. So these days I'm helping leaders cross that divide from going from individual contributor to becoming a leader. And face those challenges. So we're able to touch individuals and organizations and help make sure, either get them unstuck or preferably help ensure that they don't get stuck under that boulder that is leadership as we know it today. So
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that in the movies and and the mythologies and the superheroes, it's like, it just sounds so cool, but like you said, it's a boulder, it's a mantle. It can be pretty heavy, and it's not all it's racked up to be, right? You don't just get the awesome parking spot. And I keep running into folks being like, well, I thought when I was a leader, people would just do what I said, and I'm like, dude, I can barely get my kids to do what I say, right? And I'm bigger and stronger than them. So what made you think grown people were going to do that? That's just such a misconception. Well, that is great. No, and it's something, anybody that ends up going on this journey, experiences that first conversion. So, there's so many things you can do wrong and a few that you can do right that can help with that. But tell us, let's go back, tell us a little bit about, when was it that spark of leadership lighted up in your eyes? Was it, something you saw somebody else do? Was it a situation you found yourself in? Tell us about that.
I think that it really goes back. So I was a baseball player as a child. And I ended up playing in Little League, which went up to 15 years old. And during that last year of playing, so between 14 and 15, I started developing a rapport with other players on the team to help them with their skills. And I actually ended up getting asked back after I aged out at 15, 16 years old to help coach. So the league.
I thought you were going to say you got asked back to lie about your age and stay on until you were through college. I mean, okay, started to scare me there for a second.
No, they had to change the rules so that I could be on the field as a minor, actually being coaching, right? And that level was 13 to 15 years old. So here I come back after I crossed the line to 15, and I'm coaching guys on the team that I played with for a year or two. And that was my first, blessing and curse in leadership, right? Because it's difficult to coach and lead your peers. And I remember one specific incident. I was working with a colleague of mine at the time, quasi friends, but he was a pitcher. He was Wild Thing, right? Out of Major League, the movie. And I was
Just a bit
working,
outside.
yeah, I was working on getting him to zero it in and everything. And it's where I learned that the enemy of starting is perfection. Because we were in a jam. I had been working with him for months. We were in a jam in a game. We had nobody else to turn to. The pitcher was toast, and I was refusing to put him in. I didn't think he was ready. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. He's saying, "Coach, I'm ready. Put me in." Right? And the parents are yelling, "Put him in!" And I'm going, "He's not ready. He's not ready." And finally, I had to make the decision. We got nothing else. Put him in, and he rose to the occasion. He had the training and the skills built, and it wasn't the amount of time that maybe we wanted to get it perfect, but he had gotten enough to rise to the occasion. And that was, I've been thinking about this more and more recently, and I've realized I think that was my very first spark when it comes to leadership and how it all plays together. You got to have enough, and then you've got to empower and trust, and if they stumble, you help them get there, right? But he was able to rise to the occasion, and I don't think we ended up winning the game, if I recall. But it was the second half was much better than the first.
Yeah, but it wasn't because of him per se. Like he pulled his weight, and I swear one of these days, Rob, I'm going to say it on the podcast now. So if somebody steals this title, I'm going to be mad. But I want to write a book that is, I learned everything I need to know about leadership. I learned coaching youth sports, right? Little league, soccer, flag foot, whatever. Like there's all the patterns are there, and especially coaching at a very young age, because people are confused, and the kids are confused. But yeah, the pattern was there, and so much of leadership is that balancing act, right? You got to have enough instruction, you got to have enough clarity of direction, you got to have enough reps in, right, before you play in a live game, whether that's in business or in sports. But also knowing the time where it's like, you don't ultimately, you can't learn to ride a bike by watching YouTube videos, right? You got to get on the darn thing and start pedaling like a maniac. When is that right time? And, it's hard to tell and there's no one perfect one. But yeah, sometimes life has a way of kind of forcing your hand.
Well, and that thought is kind of our enemy, because if you think about it, you might wait until the perfect time to buy a house. When is that perfect time? Is it ever really a perfect time to make that commitment? Marriage, children, starting a business. We strive for this.
Start investing. It's like everything I've seen on that is like, it's when's the best time to start? Yesterday. What's the second best time today? Is today, right? And it may not be perfect, but you sit around on the, one of the 4-letter words in our company that we don't say is wait, right? We're like, wait is a 4-letter word. You're like, well, I'm waiting for it. And it's like, hey, I might be deliberately choose to start at that time, but I ain't waiting. I'm calling my moment when I step up to that plate. Well, that's great. So then that kind of, you're like, whoa, there's a thing there. There's a pattern here. And then that got imprinted in your skull. And then so, tell us a little bit about then your career journey between Bear and Blue Stallion.
Yeah, crazy ride. I started when I was after that coaching gig there, I was about 15 and a half, and ran into the stepdad of a friend of mine who was starting a new comic book store in town where I grew up. And I wanted to volunteer there. I started volunteering. So the first, job I had was volunteering at a comic book store. I got paid in comic books. And then...
This sounds like straight out of Rich Dad Poor Dad at this point, right?
Well, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. And so my dad was constantly working. He always owned his own businesses. But interestingly enough, my father couldn't stand working with people. Anytime he tried to have an employee, he'd get frustrated, they'd break his stuff, and he wasn't patient enough for the leadership thing. So he would always resort to doing it all himself. And I always, that kind of confused me,
Yeah, well, that's a solopreneur, right? It's not really an entrepreneur. Yeah.
That's right. And he just never had the patience. And I think that, me observing that, I took a little bit different approach to things. But I wanted to get out of the house, and what better than a comic book store? I could start learning. I could learn the register. I could learn all these different things, and I wasn't able to work a whole lot because I was too young. In California, the requirements were a little bit higher for work permits and such. So, but I did that for a bit. I had fun, and then a pizza parlor was going to be reopening. It was the pizza parlor that, as a kid, I used to go to after the season for our parties and stuff had shut down. It was reopening. And I was like, hey, that sounds kind of cool. And I was getting old enough for a permit. So I went over there, interviewed, and got the job. And this is when computers and stuff were coming in. So I was into the computer thing with like Print Artist and, all the Print Shop, all those first programs. And he didn't have any marketing. The owner didn't have any marketing or anything set up. And so I started kind of doing the marketing and the coupons playing with the computer. And like 3 months after I got the job, he promoted me to assistant manager. I was still a minor. I was like 16 and a half at that point. I couldn't run the restaurant by myself, but his brother was the dough maker and he was over 18.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, okay, you had adult supervision, but really, let's be honest, you were the adult in the store. Yeah.
Yeah, I was the adult. I got held up at gunpoint the very first night.
You know, man, I tell you, I mean, what doesn't kill you will maybe kill you the next time, right? Those seasoning moments. Yeah,
Yeah. So, I got broken in pretty quick there, so I did that, and I ended up. We talk about leadership. I had a run-in with a delivery driver. He was an older gentleman, and we were getting complaints that he was running too slow, that people's pizza was cold when he got there and stuff like that. And so I had to sit down with him and the owner, and first brush of accountability, and it blew up a bit, and he didn't like getting told anything by a child, and I didn't like, I was the boss, right? And so I'm pounding my chest, and it kind of went high and right, and he ended up walking out, and I'm all pumped up, and the owner says, hey, well, that's cool. You got your car here, right? And I said, yeah. He said, okay, well, go grab those pizzas because it looks like you're delivering them. I said,
yeah, yeah. You're like, yeah, you get to pound your chest, and you get to pound the sand, right? You're out there hoofing it out because there's nobody else to do it. And so, yeah. Wow, what great formative experiences. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that all of them were great, but boy, they learned you quick, right? So this is so great, and I mean, and it's like, surprise, now fast forward, you're you've gotten to be quite the expert. You got a lot of reps in, you got them early on, and they were pretty, like I said, formative. So let's zoom into this because you've already named some of the elements of the pattern. Life was a pretty brutal instructor for you, but for those that don't want to go through that part, maybe what is the challenge exactly? Like you're stepping into that first, it may not even be a formal, reporting relationship, but you're now the team lead, right? Or maybe you're the project leader, and I mean, you don't even have direct supervisory responsibilities per se, in terms of timesheets or, performance reviews. Tell us about the challenge of that. Like what are the things that catch people by surprise when maybe the first time they're doing it was when they're 25 or 35 instead of 15?
yeah, so I boil it down, excuse me, I boil it down to really 5 key challenges that go into crossing that divide. The first one is skills that play into leadership, the communication, delegation, those types of things. The relationship challenge, and the fact that you can't lead your peers the same way when you're no longer their peer, right? So you've got to make some adjustments in the relationships there. The responsibility piece changes. You're no longer just accountable for what you deliver. You're now accountable for what other people are delivering. You're no longer in direct control of that. So you've got to rely on a team to deliver those things now. And that's a big change for people. And then you have the overall identity challenge, making that shift into, hey, I'm no longer a tactician, I'm more of a strategist, and I got to figure that out. And then finally, the fifth one, which is what I call the team challenge. And that's where being part of a leadership team is very different than just leading a team.
Absolutely. I call that the two-team problem, right? Everybody in any kind of, leadership, management, supervisory role is by definition a member of two teams. Yeah, exactly. The one you're on and the one you're ostensibly leading, and that creates some dynamics, right? Yep.
It does, and it's not just your normal dynamics. Enter politics, or you're seeing what happens in the upper layer maybe that you didn't necessarily see before as an individual contributor, whether it's relationships between company leadership and board members, for example. All the things that come in that might frustrate you as an individual contributor probably will continue to frustrate you as a leader, but you have to handle it completely different.
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing that it helps, our listeners is that, frustration is not a symptom that something is wrong. It's a symptom that we're working on something that's important. It's like, you're stepping into that role, the notion that, well, now that I'm anointed, or I've got the business card or the, plate on this wall that says something different, it's like, well, there shouldn't be frustration. There shouldn't be friction, for any one of those five things that you described. But it's like, well, no, that's the sign that the growth is ahead, right? Something worthwhile is ahead. So just to name those again in summary. So I heard skills, for the individual, the relationship, the social fabric that you're operating in, the new type of accountability that you have, but you named, was it responsibility?
Responsibility. Yeah.
Right. Then there is, the two team scenario, and then there was one other one. I missed one. And your own identity. Yes. So your beliefs about yourself and what this means, and a little bit of a shocking consciousness there. So what a great model. That I've never heard it articulated like that before. I appreciate that distillation. So maybe we can zoom in on one or two of those. Let's unpack that a bit. So what would be what of those five, is there one that you tend to, they bump their head against first, or tends to be one that they get stuck the longest? What's one that we could pick to zoom in on?
Yeah, I think that the relationship one becomes a big deal for people if they are promoted from within, right? And I think it's very I think that people make it more complex than it needs to be often, but it's difficult, and the perception of that is difficult. I completely understand why, where you've been working with a group of individuals for some time as coworkers, you've become friends outside of work and what have you. And now, and they might have even championed for you to get that spot.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you're our guy. Yeah. You're our gal. Go get them,
Right. And then you get it, and everybody's like, okay, now what happens? I wonder how's he or she going to handle this? How is our relationships going to work? Are they going to take care of me? I was a friend. How does this now change? And the reality is, quite frankly, it does. It does change. It has to change, right?
Yeah, I hear this a lot especially, on the very visible end of the spectrum, when you're, moving into an, appointed position, or now you have, board reporting responsibilities or direct visibility, and people are like, well, yeah, when he got that job, he changed. And it's like, as a person, maybe not, but it's a different role. So, I don't know about you, but I show up very differently when I'm out, camping and hunting with, my brother, than when I am, coaching youth sports, than when I am helping out at church, when I'm working at a community function. Like, it's a different role. So you're going to see a different facet. And they're like, oh, it changed him. It changed. Like, no, it's just a different role. Now, some people, I do think, yeah, they do get drunk with power and they become crazy. That is true, but it's just that, like, they act, was like, it has to, and it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Yeah. And I think the other thing with that is, you often are promoted because of at least a perception that your skills in that role are higher. right? Like, there's five of you there, and Rob, you're just a little faster at rolling out that dough, or leading that squadron, or whatever it is that you're doing, selling these products. And so they're like, ooh, because you're better at the skill, therefore you'd make a great leader of people for that skill. And leadership is a separate skill.
Uh-oh, what? Like, yeah. I did 5 years in the Army, and a big part of the reason why I left the Army in 2005 is because the Army was starting to morph from that concept of identify potential and train first to lead, and then put into the position, and moving towards the opposite of put them in the position and they'll grow into it. And obviously in the military, a little bit, yeah, a little bit more dangerous, right? Physically scary. And I couldn't get on board with it. I still can't get my brain wrapped around the concept completely. I understand efficiency and all of that, but the it's the basis of many of the challenges that individuals do face making that transition, because they're being told that they're ready, right? And so their brain thinks that they're ready, but their brain hasn't made the shift for what it needs to be to fulfill the new leadership
Yeah.
role.
Yeah. Maybe they're ready to begin growing, but they're not ready to necessarily be there. I mean, in martial arts, it's the notion like, oh, if you get a black belt, now you're like a ninja or something. And it's like, traditionally martial arts, black belt meant you were ready to begin learning the art. Everything before then was like you were just getting enough of the pieces to put them together. But as a black belt, now you get to be a student. So it's like, wait a minute. That means the black belt means I go from kindergarten to first grade. You're like, yes, it is not graduating high school. um, but
It's a journey.
it's a journey. And to your point, I think the other part of that pattern in the Army, but I'm seeing it in the commercial space, is that demographics have kind of forced that, right? There just simply weren't enough Gen Xers, rate as a pure demographic ratio to the boomers, that were stepping out. And so there was this kind of vacuum. And then there's also now less folks. I mean, so the Ys kind of now evened out the body count, but they're not as willing to do that role. So there's this huge vacuum where there's just, the candidate pool for it isn't there. So you see people just getting sucked up, way faster in history. And in some cases, I think that's great, because I think there's a lot of really talented people that, I mean, my last guest, last episode was about leading when you're young, being in high positions when you're young. I mean, I don't think, experience, we were made the distinction, it's not just the hours on the engine, it's actually the miles on the tire. So if your engine's run a long time but you ain't got no miles on the tire, that's not helpful. So I think that's great to some degree, so it doesn't artificially block folks. But man, it does a disservice to a lot of folks where they just get pulled up too fast without the chance to get the legs under them.
Well, and it's hard if you don't, and what's the support that they're given, that plays a huge role in it, right? Because we talked about that boulder that is leadership, and when that's tossed on your shoulders, if you don't have the strength yet to hold that up, even just a little bit, right, to be able to breathe, and it's crashing on you, now you've got a huge problem, because you've got a team of people or larger that are relying on this individual to lead them, and they're cracking under the weight because they weren't prepared for what was about to come. So what's the support system that goes into that to help them either hold it or quickly start to lift it back up so that they can be successful? Or we run into what you touched on, this I guess, phenomenon, we can call it, where people want nothing to do with it anymore.
Yeah, it's like, it's not worth it. Yeah. Well, I think that isn't that what your dad was saying? It's like, man, these people just frustrate me. I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
hard.
it is hard. It is hard. So, but embracing that for those of us that choose to go on that journey, maybe it's because it's like, man, I don't like leadership, but I don't like not having leadership, right? So it's like, somebody's got to do it, and the other alternatives scare me more than me doing it scares me. So, But you and I don't know if this fits here or not, but you had mentioned a story about an existing leader who quit her job. So does that kind of fit into this space here? Maybe you could share that example of how, how it can kind of go sideways as a result, and then let's flip it and be like, okay, well, what can we do to not get ourselves in that kind of a situation, and we can be more scalable and successful?
Yeah, so the latter part of my career, I spent almost 20 years in the government contracting space here in Virginia and elsewhere. And so I have done some work with some folks that are in government contracting. And the one that you're talking about, she was working in the government contracting industry in what they call capture management. So it's part of sales. And it's a high pressure job, right? In government contracting, there's so much money and speed and all of this weight. It's a very, very challenging industry. And so a lot of pressure. You put a lot of pressure on yourself. The leadership puts a lot of pressure on you for those things. And over time, it's very compartmentalized, but you're having to pull team members from different departments together to ultimately, win that effort, that piece of work. And so there was a merger, and she inherited a leader who was a star. Look at their LinkedIn profile. They tell you how big of a star they are, of course.
That's so convenient when folks let you know that you're the star. Like, oh, thank you. I wasn't sure from the glare that was coming off of your ego, but now that I know.
Yeah, and she even one of the part. It was interesting because I went back and I looked, and one of the taglines on LinkedIn was how successful they had been in ending loss of talent. So anyhow, you fast forward the story. This leader had zero empathy. They were continuously given the excuse of being old school, which I personally, and some people disagree, but I consider that an excuse. It's just kind of an excuse that's used to treat people wrongly or in a certain way that makes you feel better about doing it, but it's still not the right way to do it. And she had been given these excuses. Well, a situation arose, and this lady's son, the one I was working with, had a one of his first car accidents, just new driver, and so she couldn't make it up to work. And this leader used as an opportunity to kind of joke and make fun of her life or whatever to a group of other folks in the room, and that got around back to the individual, and I think that was the first spark of a loss of trust. And that started to exacerbate over time, and as pressure condensed on this individual, she finally said, I'm done, I'm out. I cannot, like, this is a bad environment, right? I don't have the trust, so she just walked. She walked right at the tail end of a major project. And when she came to me, Lee, she was so defeated. And these situations and environments and frankly toxic leaders really cause people to start questioning themselves, right?
Mhm. So that goes
Which
to
is
the identity factor you were describing, right? You're like, man, is it me? Is it something wrong? Am I not, all those doubts.
and reflection is good, but
Yeah.
that scenario kind of puts you in a spot where it's very hard
Reflection's
even
good, shame is not, right? Shame is a terrible teacher.
exactly, exactly. So we had to work through that and rebuild the confidence that she had lost, and the understanding that there's some people that are bad apples out there, and they get their rocks off of making others feel that way, and there's kind of this epidemic of poor leadership, and I don't think that leader even understood. And I
Totally blind to it. Yeah.
that's right. And all the excuses being made for it from other people and what have you, that allows it to fester, and ultimately was building and ruining a culture that had existed there. And it was just tearing it down. And she was just the first one. Now, interestingly, 6 months later, that leader also left. So they're no longer there anymore. So I found that dynamic interesting. But yeah, I think that from if we flip it, you got to reach out for help, right? If you're starting to feel anything like that, that the situation is festering, and oftentimes maybe it's not best to look for that help within your own organization, right? Find a colleague outside, or some type of alternative perspective that's not knee deep in it, that's vested in it, um, and
And
have
biased by it, right? They can, they can see a little more of the larger pattern, and versus just, the particulars that might skew it one way or the other.
yeah, help is out there, and so you got to be willing to ask for it, and I think that is a challenge, especially for many new leaders, um, that they feel like they're under the pressure that they have to succeed, that all the eyes are on them, that they cannot
The
crack.
task, it's the goal, it's the bottom line, and then you start to shut down that humanity, that empathy, part of it. And it's not like going, oh well, it's all about having people like you and be nice. Like, again, we started this by saying it was about balance. And so yeah, you got to make difficult decisions. Yes, you got to have conversations with the pizza delivery guys that's not delivering. Um, but that doesn't mean you need to do it without any empathy, right? That tends to cost you more than it needs to drop the empathy. You're not buying any time, and you're not buying a lot of progress by skipping that ingredient.
Yeah, I've really realized in especially in working with individual leaders, it really comes down to the golden rule, right? If you just start from the golden rule that is still golden, but not used as much anymore, but it comes back to humanity, right? Treat people the way you would want to be treated in the situation, even if it's a negative situation or a tough situation. Treat people the way you would want them to be treated. I would not have wanted to be talked to the way I talked to that delivery driver way back then, right? And if I had thought about that before my delivery, I wouldn't have made the mistake, and the outcome probably would have been much better. He probably would have rose to the occasion. I wouldn't have had to deliver those pizzas, right? All of those things, and so there's power in stopping.
And maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the outcome would have been the same. But here's the thing. I think, your integrity, your humanity, those are things that only you can give away. And so you can say, look, like, hey, but now, right? You're like, look, I played the best cards I could. And this employee or this customer or this vendor or whatever it is, it's like, I gave them the best chance to succeed. I can't own their success, but I can give them the best odds at success. And that also, I think, has a different level of pressure. I mean, like you, I had kind of some pressure cooker things early on. I was an EMT, and run around Richmond, Virginia doing that. And you're like, hey, look, I can't save people, but I can give them the best odds of being in a condition and having the right support and having the right therapeutics or interventions or whatever we're doing, whether it's an airway or, chest compressions or not. Like, I can give them the best conditions to succeed, but ultimately it is a relationship, which is one of these other factors you talked about. They got to do their part. But if I'm like going, yeah, but they might not anyways, and I just give up, or I just smack them around and I feel good about myself, well, I've lowered my odds of success. And you compound that over a career, you've lost out on years of impact, years of gains, years of a ripple effect that could have been way more positive.
Yeah, what a huge mindset shift that is. Exactly what you just said, right? And that's the big kind of flip or switch as somebody's crossing over, with that responsibility and identity piece. You're no longer the one that's doing the high performance, right? You are now hoping and finding a way to open up the doors for all of those individuals to become what you were in that high performer, right? And so the more gates you can open, the more skills you can build, the more human you can be, the more trust that you can establish, the more you lift that team to become, instead of just one of you, 4 or 5 or 10 of you. That is your success as a leader.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a completely different algorithm.
That's right.
You know, yeah, yeah. It's it's going from 1 HP, one human power, to, like you said, 5 HP, uh, and it's hard because you're used to scoring your identity. To go to that factor again, based on how many widgets or customers or calls or whatever it is, right, that you did, and those are a little more easy to count. And whereas, counting the collective performance of a team, and basing your leadership success on the differential between what they would have done otherwise, that's harder to see because you need like a parallel universe to measure that. Like what would have happened in the absence, and what would happen with, and now I know what the differential was. So yeah, but that's how you got to think about it. Otherwise you'll get sucked down being like, well, I'll just do some widgets too, just to get my fix. And hey, as frontline leaders, you still have widgets to do. Like the idea that like now you're completely unleashed from any, delivery responsibilities, that's nonsense. I mean, I think that goes all the way up the chain. I mean, most folks I know are working CEOs. Nobody sits in an ivory tower anymore, at least, not that I've met. But yeah, changing that algorithm for how you count your success. Now, could you expand though? Right, so you do that, and then you have this notion of how do you then replicate and scale, and that it may not always be necessarily the way you would replicate it and scale if you were still that worker bee. Give us some tips on that, because I think that what allows you to go from that front line or that team lead to middle level leadership.
Yeah. So the first thing that you've really got to start to grasp is certain things have to be done certain ways. Yes. But a lot of times there's more than one way to get to the right answer that you're expecting. And you have to start to pull back that control factor of they have to do it the way you were doing it. As long as they're moving towards that direction and there's a likelihood of success, you've got to empower those individuals to think critically on their own, to fulfill, the functions on their own. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, you're trying to grow more leaders. You're not necessarily trying to grow just high performers. You want to grow more leaders. So the more you can move back from being hands-on and throttle off and let them throttle on in making those decisions under your supervision, the more chances you have of those individuals becoming leaders on their own and ultimately success. And so when it comes to that succession plan, my dad early on taught me how to shoot pool. He was a big pool player, and it was always 3 or more shots ahead. You're always thinking 3 or more shots ahead, right? And that's the strategic play. And so whatever you have to do to start maneuvering, training, responsibility, delegating certain things off to certain people, that then not just to get it off your plate, but so that they own it and grow from owning it, right? You start to sprout those seeds of leadership in those individuals while they're being those high performers to help their conversion when you are ready for them to convert. I just recently saw a video. I don't think it was a new video, but it's resurfaced. It's of John Maxwell, and he's
Prolific author, right? Great thinker. Yep.
and he's talking about, if you want me to promote you, show me that you've built somebody to replace you.
Yep.
That's simple.
Yeah. And I literally run into that, not in a good way, but we might be facilitating organizational design. We're looking at, workforce, readiness and scalability for a larger employer, right? 1,000 employees type of a thing. And then you're like, man, Rob would be great. And like, yeah, but we don't have anybody to replace Rob. And you're like, but Rob's ready. And you're like, yeah, but we would be screwed without him in that role. And so now what Rob doesn't realize is he's created his own prison, by like, yes, it runs well when he's there, but he's not created the conditions for anybody else to rise or made it really difficult to bring somebody else in brand new. And, you can't say that out loud, right? But behind the closed doors, when people are strategic, like those are conversations that are said. And I just want to, reach out to those leaders and say, you think you're doing a great job, but you've actually just locked yourself in the closet. So don't let that happen. So to your point, but it's scary, right? Because it's like, well, but if I give them a little bit of leeway, if I may make a self-deprecating joke on that, right? Give them some leeway to discover it on their own, or maybe take a slightly alternate path. I feel like I'm losing control. Like I don't have control. And it's like, well, it's true, you are giving up some control. But to me, the calculus is, for whatever loss of control that you're giving up, how much more power are you gaining? Right? Because power is defined as the ability to get work done, right? If I have control, but I'm back to that point you made earlier, but I've only got 1 HP or maybe 1.5 HPs if they're trying to do it, the awkward way that, works for me, but it's just tough for them. I've only got 1.5 HP. If I give up a little bit of control, but I gain another full HP, I have more power. And then that is where actually my ability to grow, both the impact in the role and to promote comes from. And it's just it feels scary, and it is, but it's the only way to grow.
So you have to learn how to develop people. And if you can, either you're already good at it, have an idea, or you learn that results in a much easier ability for somebody to relinquish some of that control, right? Because if you're building people, you can ease off of that control. It's no different than driving a stick. You gotta,
Yeah.
right? You got to play with the clutch and the gas. It's the clutch and the gas. You got to be able to develop people. You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Cliche, right? But true. And the more you can get yourself into the understanding and ability to develop and grow people, build the trust that is required to do that. It does take a lot of trust. It takes patience. It takes the right environment. You have to create the right environment. But the more you do that, the more then you can ease off of the control piece, and you see it start to go and take off. And then now you're just feeding it, grow. And here's the other thing. Don't forget to celebrate the freaking wins, no matter how small. Celebrate with them.
Progress,
right?
any sign of it, right? Yep.
Yes. We lose that because we're churning, hammer. Now we're not in the office all the time. We're not this, we're not that. Oh, we don't want to come together. Or what? Figure out a way, whatever it is, within whatever environment you're in, to celebrate the wins and give them that. Right? Stop taking. The give doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a gigantic cash bonus. It doesn't have to be this. It can be small, but celebrate the wins.
Small but consistent. I do the analogy. It's like if you only told your significant other you love them, once a year, and you did it like a really big way, like anniversary dinner, an awesome vacation, a spa treatment, whatever, right? Like once a year, like you just go all out, right? And the rest of the year, you're like, well, I love you. Why am I going to say that? It's like, no, it's you won't last long. It's that daily watering of the relationship.
I think you just described the person who founded Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Right?
They're like, hey, look, I got to make up for this somehow because I don't like doing it every day. So yeah, let me just give that one day. Exactly.
I wonder if they worked at the Pentagon.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, Rob, I love these metaphors, right? We talk about empowering and engaging our employees, right? Well, that is the gas pedal, and the clutch, right? Like, letting off at the right time, like got to give them enough power, but also know when to engage them. Is there a favorite, methodology or book that if you were like, hey, as a leader, what's a book or a particular model you would recommend that they look into? I know we just redid a whole one. I'll tell you after your answer. We actually did it company wide. I was like, you know what? This is such a fundamental skill, especially for the type of firm we are. We were like, we got to make sure that everybody's conversant at least in this. So what would be one of your go-tos for that?
Yeah, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's John Maxwell. I mean, I think it's a Bible. He's got a number in that series of growth and things, but I think the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, if you can work towards those principles, it's a fantastic foundation.
Is that the one where one of the principles is the leadership lid principle?
Yes, the law of the lid, law number 1.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, and the leadership lid is, they can only go so high to your level of incompetence and frustration.
Right, before they go, out,
shoot out.
right?
Yep, exactly. Because that root wants to grow, right? If it's hitting the rock, it's going to go to the side until it can find some sunlight. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yeah, the one we're doing is situational leadership, which is actually one of the first leadership books I ever read. I was like 13 years old, kind of contemporaneously with you there, and just that notion of yeah, you don't just delegate and forget about it, right? That's not development, that's abandonment. So there's a stage where you are providing that very direct instruction, and then there's a stage where you're coaching, and then to your point, then there's a stage where you put them in the game, and then you're like, okay, you got this, and now we're going to work on something else. So I love that model for that language of development there, and knowing how to provide what they need in the moment. So that's one of our go-tos as well.
Yeah, and the typical training model is see, coach, do, right? See, coach, do, and then you can start over, or you can move to back to the coaching or whatever, but you see, coach, do.
Yep, exactly. So embracing that, and knowing that it is frustrating, knowing it does take time, but all of that is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're doing the hard work to succeed. Uh, Excellent. Well, Rob, we just mentioned, a couple of great tools that are classics and go to. Although those are kind of old school now, aren't they? I mean, those are getting to be, 30, 25, 40 years old. So when people say, well, I'm old school, and I'm like, well, the Bible's kind of old, some of these, these leadership, win friends and influence people's kind of old. So I don't know what kind of old you're talking about, but I think there's more leadership wisdom out there. I don't buy that excuse anymore either. But where can folks find out more about you if they're in the region or online to get more help from you on this critical conversion?
Yeah, www.bluestallionsolutions.com, or you can also look up Blue Stallion Leadership on all of the social channels. We're pretty much everywhere these days, so that's the way business is in the ether of the internet. So
Yeah, no, excellent. I'll make sure we get that in the show notes, and love for have folks be able to reach out to you. And maybe maybe it's been a while since you were a frontline leader. So I imagine you also have services for those mid and senior level folks where they're like, hey, how could I be better, at unleashing those frontline leaders as well? So that might be, so you don't have to be the person that needs it. You might be saying, hey, I need help helping other people do that as well. So I think both of those sound like they'd be great to reach out.
yeah, and we've discovered that there's leaders who have been doing leadership for a while that have not fully crossed that divide. When we break down those buckets, they might still be having challenges with one or two of those things that's hindering them from realizing even their most max potential. So yeah, we help everybody as best we can, and yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I have one other question for you. I like to ask all our guests. It actually was an idea from one of my very early guests, and I'm like, oh, I like that. I've done it almost every time. So I'm going to ask you. So this part won't be recorded or won't be released. So feel free to take a moment. Because sometimes this is one where you don't want to just shoot out of the gate. If you want to, fine. But my question for you, this is, Rob. You mentioned 5 aspects. There's 21 irrefutable laws. There's all these great things out there. Not to list them all, but what's one aspect? What's a signature indicator when you're working with somebody that says, hey, I'm seeing an unleashed leader there? Like, what's one dimension of that you would share with our listeners today? Doesn't have to be the best one. It's just a one.
For me, it's probably passion that they want other people to succeed.
Okay. So that let's say that together, right? Because a lot of passionate leaders out there that are so passionate about the goal, the outcome, the task, whatever, that they just burn everybody else out with that passion. But having passion for theirs, yeah. So go ahead and riff on that again. So Rob, what's one aspect to knowing when you're working with an unleashed leader, or knowing that you are starting to operate as an unleashed leader?
Yeah, I think it's the passion for others to succeed. And so, you have to, first of all, understand that as a leader, there's others involved. And so if you're starting out understanding that, I think that you're already a step ahead of a lot of folks that are moving from individual contributor to leader. But if you have a passion for people to succeed, vice just you, I think you're on the right track.
Well, that is the at least the price of entry, right? And like you said, they've got to be other focused, and realize that it's the moment it's about you, it stopped being about leadership.
Exactly.
Rob, this has been great. You've shared, your own practical stories. You've shared patterns of clients you've worked with. Where can folks stay in touch with you and find out more about these 5 factors to making that leadership transition?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So www.bluestallionsolutions.com is the website. You can find us across every social channel at Blue Stallion Leadership. If you just do a search there, we're everywhere. And if you are an Amazon or Barnes & Noble consumer, you can find my book that I released in July. It's called Crossing the Divide, the leadership shift that defines your next chapter. It's 150 pages of just kind of raw information, and we've gotten great feedback. So,
wow, that is great, and congratulations on your July launch. That is super exciting. And so, yeah, you guys check it out. And like I was sharing, Rob is, both great for the person that is making that transition. But for some people, they're delayed bloomers. So maybe they got a few levels under their belt, and they're still one of those things that is holding them back. And so I think you can help across that leadership journey. And for other leaders that are like, ooh, look, I don't know quite how to do that for some of my up and coming leaders. All of which would be great candidates to chat to Rob and his team. So, Rob, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you very much, Lee. Thanks for giving me the platform.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.